What's good, gamers? Duma here. I got another banger for you today, especially for my Necromancer enjoyers out there. Last week, I posted the Dragonplar build, which is a 1-bar build that can solo just about everything that can be soloed, including veteran DLC dungeons. I have another one for you today along those lines, using the Necromancer base and the Corpse Burster set that I had the exact same receipts of clearing veteran Dread Cellar, our normal trial boss solo of St. Lothus, world boss, and veteran vateshran, with one difference. It did most of them a little faster. So if you like that build and like Necromancers, you're going to love this one, especially with all the crazy corpse bursting AoE popping off. It combines enormous self-shielding rather than healing while pumping out endless AoE nukes. I'm going to give you two versions today, the super beefy one for soloing harder veteran DLC dungeons, and then one with more damage for everything else like veteran arenas and world bosses. There are a few overlapping elements between the two builds, and I've already done that explanation on the Dragonplar build. So what I'm going to do here is in those couple of instances is put a short timer at the bottom of the screen like this, so you know exactly where to skip if you've already watched it from the other video. If you haven't seen it before, it's great info for you to make sense of things and learn a bit about min-maxing builds, especially with subclassing. I also have the written guide up and available for you now over at the GAMEROOM.tv. Let's go. For this build, a Necromancer base class is required using the Gravelord tree, and then we subclass that with the Sorcerer's Stormcalling and the Arcanist Soldier of Apocrypha trees. You can use any stamina race you like. Nord is best, but I ran everything as a Dark Elf to demonstrate for you that you can also use just whatever DPS race you may already have without race changing and be totally fine. Last, we put all 64 points in health, which will put you right at 38k HP. This is one of the most versatile and customizable builds I've played in a while. You name it, and I've probably tried it. Two-handed with Carve, dual-wield Blade Singer variants, tons of lightning staff options using just about every spammable, including things like Sorcerer's Crystal Weapon and Nightblade's siphoning attacks. Tons of options work. Legitimately, one notch below soloing veteran dungeons, every single thing worked. Legit, all of it. If you can sustain it, it works great for soloing stuff, to varying degrees of effectiveness. So please feel free to experiment and move stuff around weapon spammable-wise. It all works. The only thing to mess with is sustain elements to make it sustainable, like Helm Choice, food, and jewelry enchants and whatnot. Okay, the first set we're using is the Necro class set of Corpse Burster. It has great general DPS stats and then a 5 set that makes corpses explode when consuming them and applying minor breach to enemies hit, helping with penetration. I'll explain shortly on how we are specifically consuming the corpses, but I wanted you to be aware of the function if this is new for you. You can consume your own corpses from things like blast bones or the corpses of enemies that have died. If there are lots of enemies dying around you, it gets real silly real quick. Next, to accommodate the relentless pressure from soloing veteran DLC dungeons without Pale Order, rather than go the mitigation and healing route with major protection and heals tied to a spammable like jabs, I wanted to do something totally different and just show how versatile things can be, even at a very high level of solo content, and went with a shielding route instead. We accomplished this with the Hexo set and the War Mage's defense script on our spammable, and together gives us really strong damage shielding that both slows down the pacing of things of sorts with less health bar yo-yoing, constantly increases your effective max health, and was one of the easiest and fastest clears of the veteran dungeon solos. It isn't just a defensive set, it's more hybrid of sorts with solid DPS stats as well. Also, I'll be posting a video sometime in the future about Hexos with my thoughts. So many DMs on this set over time. I just kind of feel at this point it's best to put all of my thoughts about it in one place out there for everyone. Through the years, there have been lots of objectively incorrect analysis on the set, and then people kind of parroting that around in discords and whatnot, poisoning the well a bit. Most often, the main issue is missing context over the mechanical difference between missing health being restored or heals and health loss prevention or shields. They aren't the same thing and they affect builds differently. People often just divide the shielding out over time and compare it to heals or look at CMX or logs and miss out on this context, which is very relevant. A quick comparison in that way can be useful for a quick bird's eye view of things, and I do it here later in this video, but there's just more under the hood that matters if you truly want to be objective about it. I don't know a better way to demonstrate the viability of the set than showing you it easily soloing veteran DLC dungeons with no Pale Order and using Oakensoul. Are there better options in the game? Obviously, but it's build dependent, and that doesn't change the actual viability of the set itself, nor the edge it can take off for players who may need the assist. Okay, moving on. We put them together like this. All heavy corpse burster armor with Hexos in the belt spot, which is a medium set, with a heavy helm with a line of penetration like Krog's. Since we don't have major breach in the build, I went double sharpened maces, which will put you at 14.7k pin and live content with a little over 32% crit rating. Also pick you up a frost staff for specific mechanics, which I'll explain later in the video. And then I have 1 weapon damage and 1 absorb stamina enchant on the maces. All reinforced and nern on the armor, which will put you right at resist cap, and then all prismatic defense armor enchants with 1 health on the chest. Then bloodthirsty jewelry traits with increased physical harm enchants. CP is here for you. Take note of the Bastion CP. This is really impactful for the double shielding setup we're running. And then here are your skills I'll break down for you next. Then we have the Serpent Mundus, Bear Haunch Food, or the cheaper version, Jewels of Misrule, and Tripods. For our abilities, first I'm going to roll a short segment from the Dragonplar video on Rune Guard. Please watch it for context if this is new for you. Otherwise, there will be a timer at the bottom for you to skip if you've already seen it. I want to start with a big one that's doing so much for us for the build. I went through every single skill line and play tested every relevant option for this bar spot. It's an important defensive spot. I was certain I was going to end up with the Necro here with Spirit Mender for another 10% damage reduction and healing, which by the way is a totally viable option for you as well. But when I got to this specific ability for testing, survivability jumped straight through the roof. This ability will make you mostly immortal on the build outside of one-shots, obviously overwhelming damage, and mechanics, if you learn how to use it properly. That and the passives from the tree are really impactful, allowing for freedom in other areas. Let's break it down. The initial press of this buffs you with an ability for 20 seconds. You get minor resolve out of it for extra armor that we need, minor protection, which is redundant with Oaken Soul, and this really crazy last part here that says when you fall below 50% HP, it procs a burst heal for you. So this is like a complete safety net for you to totally mess up and it will save you. It also helps you get through pin mechanics as well on bosses, and it can be both reapplied over and over as well as block casted, which is a big deal when trying to recover with very little health. If you ever get clobbered and end up super low HP, just block cast this and boom, the next damage source burst heals you while getting block mitigation. Here I am surrounded by enemies and veteran Dread Seller to demonstrate this for you, and the only button I'm pressing here is this ability, nothing else. And every time my health dips, it pops me back to near or full HP. And you can see the heavy armor sustain passives are working here as well, keeping my magicka full as I take damage along with my potion. On the note of potions, you need to use them on cooldown. Don't sit on it. The sustain of the build is factored with them being used on cooldown like you would DPS buff potions. Here's another pack in the same dungeon, just a really useful recovery tool here. The first boss of the dungeon, Veteran Dread Seller, has this mechanic where it pins you to the ground and you take damage. You can see here, this ability fully negates this entire mechanic and you just come out of it totally fine. So really good for solo content. This is a page from our old Arcanist Infinite Archive build days coming back to work here again. Important, when you use it in the heal procs, you need to reapply to refresh the heal proc, resetting the trigger essentially. So if you used it below 50% for the emergency heal, you need to double tap it to reset the heal for the next proc. Also, the passes from the tree are a pretty big deal. We get another 3271 armor, and coupled with the ability itself giving minor resolve, it allows us to run 5 divine on our armor for even more sustain from the Atronach Mundus, which is needed. Another beautiful synergy moment here between it all. Then we get more sustain and heal recovery from the Wellspring passives. A super rare buff of minor evasion, reducing area damage by 10%, which is huge for soloing stuff. And then one lost passive here since we aren't messing with Crux at all, but that's totally fine. So as you can see, one ability spot on the bar here is doing a ton of weightlifting for us. When you get used to this, if it's new for you, it's going to feel like a cheat code lots of times where it just totally trivializes things that you may have struggled with. Next is the Sorcerer's Crit Surge, really great passive healing with a long timer of 33 seconds. You don't need to micromanage much. Next is the main spammable Shattering Knife. Surprise, this is a Bladesinger build. Shattering Knife is a melee hybrid and range spammable that will allow you to dance in and out of mechanics while keeping up damage and shielding up to 15 meters away. Its damage component has 2 parts, a single instance of damage when you throw it, and then an explosion around the target for an AoE nuke of damage. This synergizes perfectly with the build as we are running an AoE explosion setup. We use the multi-target script to accomplish this. Next, we get about 7k shielding per use of knife. This doesn't seem like much, but the actual absorption amount over time can be enormous. And at a very basic level of just comparing heals to shields, exactly on par with Crit Surge at times, all from just one little script compared to an entire ability itself. But again, there's more under the hood with shielding, such as the effective max health increase it provides provides in those windows at full HP. This is an extremely impactful script defensively. And then last, we add the lifesteal script, which isn't a huge amount of healing, but it's also not zero, and every little addition helps. Next, we have Blast Bones. This is our main corpse generator. You use this, and then 2.5 seconds later, it charges and explodes on enemies and leaves a corpse behind. We then consume that corpse with detonating Siphon, which procs your corpse burster set. And then when Siphon ends, or further uses of it if it's already active, so consuming the next corpse, has a secondary explosion aspect to it. So you actually get 2 explosions every use after the initial one. So once combat gets rolling, your very basic rotation is Blast Bones, Knife, Siphon, and repeat. Bones, Knife, Siphon, Bones, Knife, Siphon. Sometimes it gets a little wonky with Blast Bones suspect behavior and you need 2 knives, but generally it's a 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 thing. Also, your initial opening is Blast Bones and 2 knives. Then you can start your Bones, Knife, Siphon cycle because there isn't a corpse until after the first Blast Bones ends. It also can get very messy. If you don't like rotations, you'll love this. Sometimes it's best to just knife spam for 3 straight globals or so, keeping shielding up. Sometimes it's good to not Siphon right away to build corpses for certain mechanics. Sometimes Blast Bones does whatever it wants and you have to knife spam a little more anyway. It's just kind of all over the place and a very in the moment playstyle. It's only 1 bar, but there's lots of little layers in here for functionality and different ways to do things depending on what the moment needs. And last, we have a super good solo ultimate of Sanctum of the Abyssal Sea. I'm going to roll another short clip from the Dragonplar vid explaining this for you if this is new info for you. The Arcanist Bubble ulti here is just super duper silly mode, both for survivability and has a great AoE damage as well at times when the conditions are lined up. And you're also going to get even more sustain from the Wellspring passive. Any hard fight, use this. You'll get to use it often, especially with minor heroism from Oakensoul, and it just trivializes so many things. It more or less makes you immortal when the shield is up, and when the shield falls, it claps back with a bunch of AoE damage for 10 seconds. And as you can see here in this AoE trash pack fight, can easily end up your highest non-jabs damage source. So an extremely good and well-rounded solo option here. You get a lot of solo juice from heavy armor passives, but one I want you to be aware of is the Constitution passives that says you get sustain when you take damage. This is a thirsty build. Knife is very expensive stam-wise to use. You can't really sustain the dummy very long. It's balanced around actually being in content, so just a heads up there. Taking damage is part of the sustain. Also, another reason this is even possible to sustain in all heavy armor is the extremely cheap cost of Blast Bones and Siphoning costing nothing. Kind of a cool synergy moment for the setup. If you're running out of sustain, then you're either holding block too long, dodge rolling too much, or spamming knife too much. Very rarely did I need to heavy attack here. Between the enormous shielding of Hexos and Knife, the passive healing of Crit Surge, the emergency uses of Rune Guard, and a crazy good defensive ultimate, there's nothing you shouldn't be able to solo defensively with the setup, of all the things that can be soloed with 1 bar. One final piece on this version, I told you to grab a Frost Staff as well. Let me show you how I navigated a tough mechanic on the second boss of Veteran Dread Cellar and its Red Skull phase. I'm going to roll one more short clip from the Dragonplar vid, but just note I'm using the Necro Venom Skulls as the spammable here. There are a lot of ways to chop it up, but generally stamina is going to be an issue because you have to block or dodge a series of skulls that are kind of a problem while also being surrounded with ads. So I used a Frost Staff there and kept the Trifocus passive so my blocking would cost Magicka. Then it gives 20% more block mitigation, and we already have 20% from the Bracing Anchor CP. What I did was split my resources used to deal with the skulls. I would dodge roll 1 using stamina, then block 1 using Magicka, and slip in equip jabs for a heal. Then back to dodge roll for stamina use, then back to block for Magicka use, and repeat. And this was exactly enough to where I was at max dodge roll cost stacks to what I could afford at the end of the mechanic and came out of every skull phase completely fine with no issues. Once I started to do this tactic, the whole fight was totally trivial. So there's all kinds of weird ways you can change this up, or any build really, to deal with a specific tricky mechanic that is intended for tanks or groups. For all things under veteran dungeons, this is massively overkill tankiness wise, and you can go much more damage. You can still do it, but it's really unnecessary unless you just need the accommodation, which is totally fine. For the normal trial boss solo, world bosses, and veteran arenas, I scaled down the beef and added more damage output with the following. I dropped everything down to medium and brought in the Tideborn set from the Dragonplar build. You can also use Hexos in place of Tideborn here as well for a kind of middle ground between the two versions. I ran it in all divines with the Serpent Mundus, Artaeum takeaway food, and then dropped Rune Guard for Hurricane, or the other morph for Major Expedition, which I used for vateshran. Then I lowered my health attributes until I had about 25 or 26k HP and put the rest into stamina. Also, if wanted, we have access to the Boneyard skill for access to Major Breach and lesser content if you think that's something something you need, but I never used it. I just killed things a tiny bit slower while having expedition movement speed from Hurricane or its other morph. Also, just to share real quick with you, I'm working on a no trial DPS version of this as well that is coming at a later date in some form that super early tests are above 110k DPS with 1 bar using mostly the same 1-2-3 rotation. And that's it, gamers. This one was a fun one. I hope you enjoyed as well. I'll leave you with a bit of a gameplay so you can see in action. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.